What? Okay, that's not on. Let's see. Check 1, 2. Can we hear in the back? Can we hear in the back? Do we have popcorn back? Anybody need water? We have water. We'd be happy to supply some water. And we have some Cokes too, but not in the plastic bottle. They're in the tin can. And the water comes 2 ways, warm or cold. You didn't think that was funny? All right, we're going to get started here, and before we do, and I introduce you to Tim, I do appreciate y'all coming out tonight. I mean, a hot night here, so thank you so much for doing that. What's coming up next is Sunday night. Sunday night, we're going to have the VFW Post 3615, and they are, the city of Ruston allocated $300,000 to build a new post for the VFW, that house that was over by the military museum, dilapidated and condemned, built in 1933, it's gone. So we, as a community, needed to have skin in the game and come up with an additional $50,000. And some ambitious couple said, you know, let's just try and do something and see if it'll happen. And within 5 months, this community came up with $50,000. And so we're going to have a celebration here on Sunday night for the VFW. It is called Mission Accomplished Icing on the Cupcakes, because we're going to have cupcakes, going to have root beer floats, and we could have Coke floats too if you want to come back. And we're going to have the drawing at 5 o'clock here. So you still have a chance for $10 to get like an incredibly cool cooker trailer. And so that's going to be this coming Saturday night. If you would be so kind, sign the, pardon me? Sunday. Did I say Sunday night? Sunday. I'll be here Saturday night all by myself. That means I would have won, right? Only come Sunday, I will not have won. So Sunday, yes, it's a Sunday from 4 till 6, the drawing at 5. It's just a casual come and go. If you would be so kind, sign the book, just let us know that you were here. It's really neat what's happening at the museum. Within the last 2 months, we've had a couple from France, a couple from Ireland, Italy, and Iowa, and more. But I mean, so it's really neat to see that the United States and others are coming to Ruston. The Lincoln Parish Museum is a destination point. So I won't talk much more. Follow us up on Facebook, please. That way we kind of keep you informed. If you didn't get your lucky Lincoln copper penny, please take one. And compliments as a big budget item right here. Thank you, Fred and Frida, for doing that, for anybody that comes by. And Tim has said we're going to leave the exhibit up past Friday, Sunday night. I'm going backwards. Sunday night. So, and I'll be here the rest of the week. I get here about 10:15. And if I need to open up, if you have some friends or family members that want to see this, I'll be happy to come and open up the house again. There's about 15 plus pieces of art here that Tim will tell you about. And thank you once again for coming out. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Sherman. He is an artist. You're going to learn a new word, probably 2 words, stipple and pointillism. Did I say that right? Pretty close. Pretty close? Well, he's going to correct me. And also the aviation art here. Tim, if you would be so kind. Yes, sir. Let me turn you on. Okay. Microphone-wise, that is. Very well. All right, we got a hot crowd here tonight. I warmed them up for you, Tim.
I guess. How's that? Well, thank y'all for being here. It's very important that you do sign and register. We get a lot of credit for that. And I'm part of the Chenault Museum also. And it's very important when you visit the Chenault Museum in Monroe that you sign and register, because it gives us, we know who you are, we know where you're from, and we actually, other people on the board and other people that are very important to us get to see the numbers. So it's very important to us for y'all to do that. But appreciate y'all being here. Thank you, Rick Godley, for everything you've done. You're a hard charger, and you just have done tremendous work to get this going. We appreciate it. Kathy Cox, where are you at? There you are. Thank you very much for publicizing this as well. You've done a wonderful job. It's a great write-up in the paper. I'm sure thank you for that. And thanks, Miss Shirley Wesselhoff. She's here today. She's an author of a book, and her book is about her late husband, and it's a phenomenal story, a great story. And that's kind of where we're going with this, is that art is not just always depicting a particular object, just like a single airplane is what people might see, but there is a story behind most of it, most of them. And before the night's over, I would like to dive into a little story about one of the pieces of art that I have here. And then when you leave, you might appreciate it just a little more, and especially after looking at it real close, after listening to what I will read about it and what I have to say about it. It's pretty amazing. And it's going to be a time period during World War II, and it's a very, many stories in any war. And I'm wanting to encourage people that have experiences in wartime to talk about their stories, to talk to, if not, to pass it down to the next generation or anybody that's interested, and maybe even just to talk to themselves, journal first. And so that's what I encourage, that's what Ms. Shirley encourages. And so art is another form of telling stories, just like a book. And so that's kind of what we're going to dive into in a little while. But I'm Tim Sherman. I'm from Monroe originally. I served 6 years in the Marine Corps after college at ULM, majored in aviation, then mastered in education, and then went into the Marine Corps with a pilot guarantee. So I went to the OCS and then the basic school. At the end of basic school, you already have your MOS, you already know what you're going to do, but all the other guys, like James here, you have to, after the basic school, you have the opportunity to just pick what you want to do. And Mr. James here was an infantry officer. And appreciate everybody here. If you're a veteran, appreciate you. Appreciate you. I think you're a veteran as well, Ben, right? Yes. Thank you for your service. Anyone else here that's a veteran? Anyone else? But thank you for your service. And why it's so important to me is that, well, let me get back to a little history. After the Marine Corps, I flew for U.S. Customs Service doing anti-drug work. Did that for 10 years in Peru, South America, Central America, and Mexico, a lot of the time. After that, I went to UPS Airlines and flew for 20 years with them. And so it's kind of a wide variety, but I think the Marine Corps was a big stepping stone for my career. And it's, art has always been my interest. I had my father was in World War II, and he was on the, up to 1943, November, it was the bloodiest battle of the Marine Corps history, which was at Tarawa, just a little island that was only 3 miles long. That was like the bloodiest battle in history, so up to that time. And he was there. And he dealt with the aircraft that came in off the carriers, because Tarawa was one of the first islands that where they started the island hopping campaign to get to where they were going to launch a B-29, being so much closer to Japan. But that is where they started. So he worked on the airplanes that came off the carriers that worked or that needed maintenance. So he did all the work on those airplanes. He crew chiefed on them, and that just fascinated me. But with most military veterans, I would say it's really, they don't talk about it very much. They don't tell their stories. And so that's why I'm trying to encourage people to pass it on to the next generation. You know, I ask people all the time. I say, and I told Miss Shirley, I said, you know, I ask people, are you a veteran? And they'll go, no, but. And then they'll say, well, my father did or my granddad did. And then I say, well, what did they do? And they can't tell me, most of them. And it's because they just didn't want to talk, and that's fine too, because it was it could be very graphic. It could be something they don't want to talk about, something they might want to hold in, but I'm encouraging them to, if nothing else, journal. Get a journal out and start writing down your thoughts and getting everything into where you could be comfortable possibly later on telling your story. Come on in. And so that's kind of my motivation to do what I'm doing, and also with Miss Shirley, she's doing the same thing. She's written a book about her late husband, and if it wasn't for him writing his journal and telling her his story, that book would never have been written. And there's so many stories like that are just held in, and they just don't get out there. And our next generation is our future. So it would be great to I would love to have my dad's stories, and I never did. There's some things I can piece together just because I've read it, learned it. He had back in the, I guess, early 80s, he had a friend that came over and visited us from Wisconsin. And this guy worked with him, but he had boxes of photos that he had literature, he had all kinds of stuff. And I was just there soaking all of that in. And my dad just, never talked about it. He just shook his head, And there were some pretty amazing stories. It seemed like he remembered what was kind of maybe unusual, and sometimes even funny. That's what he remembered, but that's what he talked about. He didn't talk about all the other things. So I'm encouraging journaling and getting the word out to the next generation. So not just they can get the word out, but they can be loved. It's my dad, when I was born and my siblings, he was a man that never said I loved you, and there's a book that I want to promote later on, and maybe do a course. It's called Letters from Dad, and it's something that I feel like I need to do and want to do, and it is scriptural oriented as well, and I would love to do that. And at some point I'll get together a program to maybe we can get some other veterans together and get them to open up a little bit and tell their story. But as I've got artwork that's scattered throughout this beautiful historic building, and appreciate you offering for me to come, Rick. Sure appreciate it. I love it. It's just a great place to be. But what a nice home it is. And I've got artwork scattered around. I've got some more artwork back here. But when it's over, just go ahead and look around and ask any questions. And we can go over a few things as we go through. But is there any questions right now about anything? Anything on your mind about art or types of art or anything? What, Rick?
Stippling.
Stippling. All right. Let me see. I might have to have you, Miss Shirley. Shirley, you mind? Yes, please. This is probably, it might be an airplane that most people recognize, but it's a B-17 Flying Fortress. I never draw anything for myself. I started drawing for my dad and drew planes that he worked on. When I was at UPS, I had a gentleman or a doctor that did our flight physicals, and he flew the B-17, and his daughter called me up one day and said, hey, can you do an art piece for my dad for his birthday? And I said, I'd be glad to. Well, I didn't get it to him for his birthday, but I got it to him for Christmas. But you can see, this is one dot at a time. So all the shading, all the dark shades are, it's one dot at a time, they're just closer together. And it takes a long, long time to do. And,
I was going to ask you how long, Tim.
I would have to say I've never put a stopwatch to it. You know, you get in that right brain and time just flies by, and I never think about hitting a clock. But I would say that probably took 80 hours, I would think. And I've done quite a few, and I want to get back into it. As you can see, this one is dated, where's the date? It's not even dated. This one over here is in 93, I believe, 94. So, you know, I never got them out because 94 was before, you know, it was before the internet, it was before eBay. So I just stacked them in a closet. So, yeah. Did you do that from memory, or did you have like a Rebel? Yeah, I did. I do everything from a photograph. I find a photograph or a picture that I like, and people say, well, you ought to just trace it. Well, I don't do that. It's complicated, but most airplanes have straight lines, and I just start drawing straight lines, like a line from the nose to the tail, and all of these little lines of the stabilizers in the wings, and make them all join. Then I'll take the measurements, take the angles, and I'll multiply, you know, times 3 or whatever to get that size that I want. And it takes a long time to do that. And then it's just one dot at a time. Yes, sir? What I was impressed with, I only found 2 mistakes. You know, I tell you this, you know, and that is not finished. You know, how can you put dots on that in one day, just say, I'm through? Well, that's what I do. I'm just through. I'm tired. You know, but you could put 1,000 more dots on there, and it'd be a much better print. You know, you just don't know when to stop. So,
I got one question.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
On 17.
Yeah.
See, most of it's there, but you left out one portion of the wing.
Correct.
Is that a purpose?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. It's just. I wanted the size. If I would have, I wanted this size print, right. And so and most of my drawings are like that. A lot of them are. Right. I want this to be a certain size so it'll stand out in the 16 by 20 print, and so. If I would have added the wings, this plane would have been a much smaller, you know. So, yeah, yeah. So it's just whatever the artist wants to do, you know. And I tend to do it regularly. I don't know why, but I do. Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you, Ms. Shirley. I appreciate it. This. I want to talk about a little bit. I mean, this is just a picture of an F-4F Wildcat. This was the main fighter in World War II when World War II broke out. When World War II broke out, most everything we had was already obsolete. The 20s and the 30s were not good because there was no war as far as production goes. We weren't prepared. It took Pearl Harbor to prepare us for, you know, the giant factories that stopped production of making automobiles to make tanks and jeeps and airplanes and everything else. So what won our war in World War II was the factory, because it enabled us to have everything we needed as a fighting man to do our job. So this was an F-4F Wildcat, and you can just look at it and say, well, that's just a Wildcat. But if you can look at some things and notice that it's not a story, but there is a time frame behind it. These markings right here were only during Midway, the Battle of Midway, which is in 42. And then they learned, and this center dot was red right here on the wings. And they realized after Pearl Harbor and after bullets started flying, they go, ooh, our gunners are just seeing red. And so that's the Japanese. So they did away with the red dot. They did away with all this red on the tail and changed the paint scheme. And so all during the war, there's different paint schemes because of different maybe occurrences or they're learning. You know, what's a better way to either, you know, us recognize our own planes and the enemy not recognizing them. So, but you can look at the paint scheme and also this number here. F-13 was flown by a man named Thatch, last name Thatch, and he was very instrumental in teaching Wildcat and Hellcat pilots how to fly in combat. So that's his airplane. But this is just one I did back in That's the fighter. This is the torpedo bomber in World War II. And this was the one that came after this one. This one was created in the 30s. And by the time World War II broke out, this was already obsolete. This airplane here was getting modified in order to increase its power, increase its firepower, and to do a better mission because the Japanese had an airplane that would outdo it. And so they modified this, and then they started building the F-6F Hellcat, which is, I have a print of that back here. You want to, Miss Shirley? Grab it. This was a later version. This was an updated version of this Wildcat here. It was manufactured by Grumman. And it could beat the Zero, and it was the first fighter that could. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. A lot of the art that I have, this is what I've done. I've got numerous prints back here, but I've got a lot of prints like this and this other that are paintings. And the neat thing about those paintings are that they tell stories. Also, they are signed by the artist. They're numbered, which means if they made 500 of them, they'll never make any more. And you'll have one of those. And also, that a lot of the prints that I have are signed by the pilots or the air crew. And if it's World War II, unfortunately those people are not here anymore, most of them, I would imagine. So as you venture around the rooms, look at those paintings, and we can go through a story. After this is over, we'll go through and look at these prints, and we can talk about them if you want to. And usually they're specific battle. They're famous flyers, things like that. Anyone know the history of this Avenger right here? This is the Avenger. That's like this one over here. It replaced the TBD. This is called the TBF. It's the TBD. The TBD and the TBF. Now the TBF is over here. That is George W. Bush's airplane. And I guess you can see where all the people on the bottom have signed it. And they were crew members on that plane and also crew members in his squadron. But I guess he was too busy one day to sign my print. Unfortunately, I don't have his signature. But a lot of dealers do that. They'll have their prints. They'll take them to a certain location just as this. And they will have the pilots there. They'll have the crew members there. And they can sit down and do the signing of the prints. And I have a letter of authenticity that come with them that tell you a little bit about the print itself, a little bit about maybe the artist, the event, and a little bit about the individuals that signed the prints themselves. Any questions yet?
Is there a copy of this in the Bush Library at A&M?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. And there's probably a couple others. I know there's one other one that an artist, famous aviation artist, had done, and I would love to research that and see where all of these are. You know, John Shaw did this one, and he's a very, very well-known artist. And George W. Bush was shot down in the Philippines and rescued by a sub and taken back to safety. And so that was his mission on his way to bombing a radio station. So that's the history of that print right there. I have got a story that come from a book. If I don't know something about an art print, I'll find out who drew it or who painted it, and then kind of look at it and see what I think the story might be. And then I'll research it. And this story, this is the Battle of Midway. Anyone familiar with the Battle of Midway? Yeah. Well, this is the Battle of Midway, and we'll go into it a little bit, and then after you hear what the book says about it, maybe look at the artwork and look at it a little closer. You can see, you can pick out certain things that But in order to go into this, I need to introduce someone. And his name is John Waldron. John Waldron, his ship's mates called him Skipper. And he had a very rough appearance, elderly looking man, very leathery appearance. And he was raised in South Dakota on a Sioux Indian reservation. And I think he was proud of that as well. His father sold vegetables to the local tribe to exchange for dried fish, actually, so they could live. He grew up being ridiculed, it says, because of his lack of social graces. So I would guess he was kind of brash, maybe. But evidently he accepted because the book says he grew to tolerate it. He'd never seen the ocean until 1920 when attending the Naval Academy. But 22 years later, now in 1942, he's 42 years old. He was considered being one of the exceptional squadron commanders commanding Torpedo Squadron 8. He trained his pilots well, but he was fair and he was firm with them. After the squadron was formed, shortly after Pearl Harbor, they flew obsolete Brewster training planes. A new pilot had been killed trying to land his plane, and the skipper stormed to Washington, D.C. and told the higher-ups that he wasn't going to allow his boys to go up in those planes anymore. And the next week, they started receiving new airplanes. And as I mentioned, the F-4F, like this fighter here, was starting to go through a modification at that time, plus the SBD Dauntless, which is the dive bomber that we'll talk about. And I had a picture of it, and I actually left it. Typical. But they were being upgraded for war. Commander Waldron, well aware of the shortcomings of his obsolete aircraft, the TBD Devastator, which is this one here to my right, was in the process of being phased out instead of being modified. The Devastator was old, slow, and unreliable. It was armed with very small caliber machine guns, one in the nose that could be operated by the pilot, and one in the back that could be operated by a tail gunner. Even the torpedo that it carried was very, very unreliable. So the deck was stacked, not in his favor from day one. And actually on this, the difference between this one and this state-of-the-art at the time torpedo bomber is that this torpedo bomber had to haul the torpedo underneath it. And so it produced a lot of drag, which made the airplane very, very slow. Where this torpedo bomber here could carry it inside it, and so it could be more aerodynamic and fly much faster and use a lot less fuel. The Devastator was to be flown until its replacement arrived, which was the Grumman TBF Avenger, which is on the far right, a state-of-the-art aircraft at the time, which was on the way. But their opposition was a Japanese fighter called the Zero. This aircraft was highly maneuverable and 3 times faster than the Devastator that Commander Waldron flew. He'd done a great job preparing and toughening up his crew, anticipating the worst, saying, someday one of you might be all alone out there. When something goes wrong, at least one of you will know what to do. The squadron's intel, well, this is when they were heading westward on the USS Hornet. They were heading westward toward the Midway Islands, and a intel officer came in and informed them that the Japanese fleet was to reach striking distance of Midway Island the following Wednesday or Thursday. And Admiral Nimitz's plan, this is the other part of the stack against him, Admiral Nimitz's plan was to ambush the Japanese carriers while their aircraft were raiding Midway Island. This would allow this would leave the carriers unprotected and disabled, where they couldn't land their planes, and so therefore their planes would be forced to ditch in the ocean. But he also said that they were going to fly, that they were going to leave all fighters together, like the F-4F, as one unit to protect the dive bombers that would be flying at 18,000 feet, leaving Waldron's Devastators to fly low, without fighter protection, untouched, going in at 500 feet. But Waldron knew that the only way his torpedo planes were going to survive was with fighter escort that he would not get. On June 3rd, 1942, in his stateroom, Waldron took stationery out of his drawer and began writing to his wife, Adelaide. Waldron knew that death could come at any moment, and Adeline understood as well. And his letter to Adelaide was, there's not a bit of news that I can tell you now except that I am well. I have yours and children's pictures here with me all the time. And I think of you almost all of the time. I believe that we will be in battle very soon. I wish we were there today. But as we are up to the very eve of serious business, I wish to record to you that I am feeling fine. My own morale is also excellent. You may rest assured that I will go in with the expectation of coming back in good shape. If I do not come back, well, you and the little girls can know that this squadron struck for the highest objective in the naval warfare, to sink the enemy. I love you and the children very deeply, and I long to be with you, but I could not be happy ashore at this time. My place is here with the fight. I could not be happy otherwise. I know you wish me luck, and I believe it will that I will have it. You know, Adelaide, in this business of the torpedo attack, I acknowledge we must have a break. I believe that I have the experience and enough Sioux in me to profit by and recognize the break when it comes, and it will come. I dislike having the censors read a letter from me such as this. However, at this time, I felt I must record the thoughts listed in the foregoing. God bless you, dear. You are a wonderful wife and mother. Kiss and love the little girls for me, and be of good cheer. And love to all from Daddy and Johnny. If you notice, he mentioned, I acknowledge we must have a break. And what he's talking about, this letter was like, he knew it was going to be censored. So it was kind of to his wife, but it's also to whoever might be reading this after the fact. He was stating, when he made the statement, I acknowledge we must have a break, is that was his statement that he was needing fighter protection and he wasn't going to get it, according to higher-ups. But on Thursday, June 4th, 1942, the teletype came in saying many enemy airplanes heading for Midway bearing 320 degrees, and that's from the island. But standing in front of their ready room on the ship, Waldron gave his final instructions. And at the end of his speech, he said, if there's only one man left, I want that man to take his torpedo in and get a hit. He also stated that he didn't think that the carriers would be where the intelligence officers said they would be, that they would stay together to recover their aircraft after bombing Midway, which would be a different bearing for them to fly than what was going to be issued. While the pilots manned their plane, the squadron commanders were to stay back for last-minute changes. And at that time, the fighter squadron commander spoke up and requested that his fighters to stay with Waldron and to protect him at 500 feet and low, but the admiral stuck to his guns and said no. And at that time, they said they made the call for all the pilots to man their airplanes. And the brief was to fly 265 degrees to intercept the enemy carriers. But Waldron suggested immediately that he was in disagreement and that they should fly 240 degrees instead of 265. And that would take them to where he thought they would be, not where the admiral's crew said it would be. So they actually stuck with the CO stuck with the plan and said, yes, fly 265, not 240. So 6 Avengers, like this one over here, be aware that these are brand new. They just came from the States. They haven't even made it to the carrier yet. If they would have made it to the carrier, he wouldn't have been flying that airplane he's in. He would be flying these. And they would have much better success. But 6 took off from the island to intercept the known position of 260 degrees out. So as soon as they got airborne, went out a few miles, they found the fleet. But in the meantime, there was dissension amongst ranks. They had to launch aircraft from a flight deck, and it was very, very slow. And the numbers that they had to launch were 18 Wildcats would take off first, 8 would fly overhead, while 10 would go out and escort the dive bombers at 18,000 feet. 34 dive bombers would then take off, and the ship CO orders were for Waldron's torpedo bombers to take off last, even though they were the slowest airplanes there. Take off last, and Waldron would take off and be the last one off the deck. So, as you can imagine, the Avengers are flying and they're getting shot up. As soon as they see the ships, that's where the zeros are. So they get all shot up. Out of all 6, all were shot down. 2 survivors. 1 limped back to the island. All the others were down in the ocean and had perished. 2 people from 1 airplane actually limped back, and it's pretty fascinating in the book how he actually got back to the island, but he did, and those 2 survived. There was a 3rd person in there that did not. So here we are with 3 different types of airplanes flying and going in the wrong direction, according to Waldron. And he's pretty smart. After about 60 miles out, he knows that he's going off radar of the carrier. So as soon as he's off the blip, the blips are off the screen of the carrier, he blurts out, "You're going the wrong way," you know. And then of course the radio silence was broken. It wasn't supposed to happen. And then the CO of the whole group chimes in, of course. And here's what it says. At 0816, Troy Guillory was startled to hear a voice coming through the earphones of his cockpit radio. He recognized it right away. He had heard it enough times aboard the Hornet. It was the voice of Lieutenant Commander John Waldron. But Guillory noted that he didn't identify himself with his call sign and that they were heading in the wrong direction. So the story is that after a few more minutes, he basically says, he says, the hell with you, talking to the CO, and he banks off to go to the heading of what he thought was going to be the course, which was, what did I say? He went to the heading of, yeah, what was it? Oh, 240, I believe it was. Anyway, yeah, anyway, instead of 265, he was going to head 240. So that's what he did. And all the 15 planes went with him that was in his group. And so immediately, and not too much longer, I mean, he went straight to them. He went straight to them. They did exactly what he thought. But the problem was, he was, of course, he knew he was not going to have an escort anyway. So he was without the bombers, he was without the fighters. They were all on their own, 15 airplanes. And as soon as they saw the carriers that they were to attack, they saw the Japanese and the Japanese saw them. They were completely decimated. And the name of this is "We Won't Turn Back." And that's exactly what Waldron said. That's a quote. And he said, "We won't turn back. We're going to continue." And he said, "Good luck," basically to his guys. The book is very graphic on what happened. But I can tell by the way this book was written and the history behind this. This is the sole survivor's airplane. This is Ensign George Gay's airplane. George Gay was the only sole survivor of the whole 15-plane, 30-person, 30-pilot and crew member squadron. He actually had dropped his torpedo, was heading in, and had zeros on his tail, being all shot up, and he was approaching at this angle, and he actually flew over the guns and down the flight deck until he finally had to ditch. The guy in the back was already shot up and dead. He landed and cartwheeled, actually got out of his airplane after some difficulty, of course, and was the witness of the entire Battle of Midway. So a lot of what you read is from this one individual because he was there, had a front row seat. He was in the water for 2 days, right amongst the carriers and all the planes that were being shot down out of the sky. He even documented on how Waldron went down and most everybody else. So it was a very horrific battle. And that is how Waldron met his demise. Troy Guillory was in a Dauntless dive bomber, survived the war. He's actually a native of Monroe, Louisiana. He was an instructor of mine, but very great gentleman, and it tells you in the book. The book's called Dawn of Thunder. Great book. It tells you everything about everything that happened at Midway, but most books do because they've interviewed Troy Guillory, they've interviewed George Gay, but unfortunately they're deceased now, but their stories made a great book and a great testament to actually what happened and what happened to our pilots. But, you know, it's an unfortunate story. A lot of things could change, and I'm sure, you know, things did after this. But this was the turning point of the war. if you know anything about naval history, because of actually what this squadron did, helped save, for our Navy destroy 3 of their 4 carriers, because they did have to change course. They changed directions due to this squadron. And it mentions that planes were caught on the decks and things like that, and our bombers just went in and decimated them. So we learned, we learned from our mistakes, and what a great story. But we had to have people to tell those stories. But as you come by, look at what is going on here. You do see the Japanese fighters, which were there. You see the torpedo being dropped. You see all of the ordnance being fired at them. And you also see the guy in the back. He's actually slumped down. He probably did not pass away until he hit the water, probably drowned, but he was disabled and unable to speak. They think he was alive until impact or drowning. But this would be Ensign George Gay's airplane. Any question on that? But it's a great book. Read it. And there's a lot of history to it and a lot of local history. Troy Guillory was a great man. He came to my high school, talked to our school, and then I was fortunate enough later on to fly with him. But what a great man, very experienced pilot, and had gone through a lot. And I wish, at the time, you wish you could have talked to him and got more information out of him, and I'm sure he would have been happy to. But at that age, I just was not aware of questions to ask. Maybe I was too timid to ask, but I would love to have had more information directly from him. Pretty powerful. But any questions for me, Ben?
Could I say a little bit about the B-17?
Yes, sir, please.
When the B-17 was designed, the thought being, it was done as a flying fortress. It had enough machine guns on every side of it that it did not need an escort. Germans proved that was done right.
Correct.
But at any rate, we had no planes that could escort them past about the border of France.
Right.
A little bit further in.
Exactly.
And yet they were being sent into Germany. Now, it so happened that Churchill was insisting that we get bombers over there. They need them, and they really didn't need them. But at any rate, as a result, some of the crews did not get a thorough training before they were sent over there and put into action. There were 10 men in every plane. It was not unusual when those things flew that they would have 300 in the air. And it was not unusual when 100 of them didn't make it back.
Exactly.
I just think that's 10 men for each plane.
Exactly. And this is during daylight hours.
That's right.
Because
the British,
incredible.
The British had lost so many planes and so many men.
Right.
That they let the U.S. fly during the day and they fly at night.
Right. Exactly.
It's really amazing how wars are fought.
I know it. I know it.
I can remember because that was a long time before me. I was in SAC in the 60s.
Okay.
Had a lot of good experiences. I was in the flight surgeon's office. I
Oh,
was a flight medical officer.
Oh, great. Yeah.
I wasn't a flight surgeon because I didn't have the 3 extra years of training that I
Right.
would have had to have. But anyway, we had the opportunity to go out and mix with all the flight crews. It was in Barksdale most of the time. I did get sent over to Okinawa for about 2.5 months at a time. But that's when they first started bombing up in North Vietnam. But at any rate, the guys that I met who were in the service, I was most impressed with nearly all of them. Because during the time they were on alert, they were encouraged to study. They also offered classes to take at night and other times if they didn't have work. Some of them working on their CPA, some of them working on their LSAT, so they get into law school, doing things like that. We also had the ping pong champion of Ohio State. And we had a pool shark. He was a little guy, about 5'3" or 4", big horn rimmed glasses. He had to have somebody to carry with him, I'm sure. to save him, or he would have been whipped. He drove nice cars, so I was
Yeah.
for him, you know.
He probably had a bouncer or two.
But
Yeah.
anyway, there are a lot of stories about that, you know, and it took them a long time to get some, well, really until they got the P-50 going and the P-38, they didn't really have anything to go all the way
Correct.
into Germany.
Exactly.
To protect those planes.
Exactly.
Now, the B-29 never flew in Europe. It was strictly out on the Pacific.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Anyway, there's a lot of interesting stories.
Yeah.
Most of this I've read or been told.
Yeah.
by others.
And I don't know if y'all have seen Masters of the Air that's on TV. It's a great show. The book is even better. Get the book, read it. I'm only halfway through. It's a pretty thick book, but it tells you a lot of how they came about, who made the decisions on daylight bombing and why and all of this stuff. But it's basically they were all learning, you know, but they made the decisions anyway. And it cost a lot of lives, but that was war, and we were in war. Also, Miss Shirley's book will attest to a lot of the bombing in Hamburg. When this is over, ask her about her book. It's an awesome book. Miss Janice Hill has a book on her husband that was a POW in the Philippines. And the neat thing, Churchill said, you know, the worst thing that could have happened was us losing the Philippines. But we lost the Philippines because the planes weren't there that they said were going to be there. But like you said, those planes went to Europe. And Churchill was thankful, but he was, of course, sympathetic, but he was sure thankful that they got the airplanes in Europe at that time. But unfortunately, it cost a lot of our lives, during the death march and being a POW.
We had a doctor here, Dr. Black, who was a prisoner of war on that baton death. He was a prisoner of war for 39 months.
Wow.
He had some interesting stories to tell. He did not talk about it.
Right, exactly.
But occasionally he would.
Yeah.
And he told me some things that I wouldn't have thought they were meant.
Exactly. And
I asked him, I said, how did the guards treat you? He said, they treated us much the same way they treated their own people. They were not forgiving, or whatever the proper word is, like the U.S. people are.
right.
They were very strict on them, and he said there were always a couple of them that were bullies. And those are the ones you tried to avoid. But he came back, he had severe hepatitis. He had to be in Walter Reed for, I believe, 6 months before he was released.
Yeah.
And that's where he met his wife.
Some good come out of everything, right?
She was an Army.
And Janice Hill's dad was a prisoner. POW 1000 is the name of the book. And why I mentioned the books, these two books, is that I have a military surplus store in Monroe. It's called Victory Military Surplus. And I try to promote their books so people can know the history and get it straight from the source, and what great people. Shirley's wonderful. Her grandson's here. Appreciate him. But great people, great stories, and great sacrifices. Great sacrifices. But any questions? Feel free to come through, browse around. That's going to be it for me, unless y'all have questions. Anything? Please look around. If you have any questions on any print, I'll be glad to talk to you about it. Thank you all. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Tim. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Browse around, walk around Sunday. You want to come on back for some root beer floats? And
He was the temple off Air Base,
thank you all so
Berlin
much for
airlift.
coming out.
Oh, wow.
That's one of my fathers.
Wow.
Texas, or to